In today's video, we're exploring the most horrifying shark encounters ever recorded. From a warehouse worker's fatal mistake in Australia's murky river waters to a fisherman's final moments off the coast of Massachusetts. But first we begin at Mossel Bay, where two little boys gets eaten by a great white shark. It was July 12th, 2023, off Mossel Bay, South Africa. The winter sea lay calm under a pale blue sky, the water smooth except for the occasional ripple of a gull skimming the surface. The small charter vessel bobbed gently in the swells, its hull creaking against the pull of the current. For a family who had waited months for this day, it seemed as if the conditions could not have been more favorable. Yet beneath that calm, danger moved unseen. The family had saved for this trip carefully. Peter Van Zyl, a construction foreman in his late 30s, had promised his two sons, Daniel, age 10, and Willem, age 8, that he would one day take them out to sea. His work was demanding and rarely left space for long breaks, but he had arranged this single outing as a reward for their patience. His wife, Mariska, had packed food and gear the night before, excited to give the boys something different from their routine weekends at home. For Peter, the trip was a way to deliver on a promise, and to give them a memory he thought would last their lifetimes. Their decision to charter a local skipper was a sensible one. Neither parent had experience at sea, and the boys had only fished in lagoons and rivers. The charter boat, though small, was equipped with the necessary safety gear: life vests, a radio, and buoys. The skipper, a man with decades on these waters, had mentioned as they set off that great white shark sightings had been unusually frequent that winter, drawn by seals and fish that gathered along the bay's edge. It was not unusual information. The Van Zyls had heard similar stories from neighbors. However, they were reassured by the calm water, the boat's steady movement, and the presence of an experienced captain. The setting that morning was striking. Clear skies gave the ocean a glass-like appearance, broken only by occasional flashes of silver as bait fish flicked near the surface. The coastline in the distance stood rugged and green, cliffs rising where land met sea. Around the boat, seabirds wheeled and dove, their cries carrying over the water. Daniel and Willem leaned over the stern, tossing bits of bait fish into the water, laughing as gulls fought over the scraps. It was the kind of scene that seemed too peaceful for danger. Great white sharks are frequent visitors to Mossel Bay, drawn to the dense seal colonies nearby. Adults often range from 12 to 16 feet, weighing over 2,000 pounds. Their attacks on humans are uncommon but devastating, powered by immense speed and bite force measured at over 4,000 pounds per square inch. In winter months, sightings increase as they patrol closer to shore. Several warnings that day might have warranted more caution. The skipper had pointed out earlier that he had seen dorsal fins near Seal Island just a week prior, advising the boys not to lean too far over the stern. He reminded the parents again when the children began tossing fish scraps, noting that sharks are quick to respond to such activity. The calmness of the water itself, a factor that made the surface unusually clear, could also allow predators to rise undetected until the last second. Yet these notes of caution blended into the background of the outing. The boys were restless. Their parents wanted to give them freedom, and the skipper did not press the matter further. The incident began without warning. As Daniel leaned over the stern to scatter another handful of fish pieces, the water beneath him darkened. A massive shape surged upward with explosive force, striking so quickly that for an instant it seemed as though the boat itself had been jolted. The shark clamped around his torso, lifting him clear of the water before dragging him down in a single, violent motion. Witnesses later said the sound was not a scream, but a short, shocked cry, cut off as the water closed above him. Chaos broke instantly. Willem lunged toward the stern, calling his brother's name, when the shark struck again. Great whites rarely breach repeatedly in quick succession, but attacks on two people in close proximity, though extraordinarily rare, have been documented. In this case, the shark turned sharply beneath the stern and surged upward again. The predator's head broke the surface in a sudden thrash, seizing the smaller boy across the legs and hips. Instead of lifting him free of the water, the force yanked Willem partially over the rail and then downward, the shark's weight and power overcoming Peter's grip on his son's shirt. Mariska screamed, frozen in shock, while Peter nearly vaulted overboard, checked only by the skipper who seized his arm. The sea churned red as the shark rolled beneath, dragging the child out of sight. Then, as suddenly as it had erupted, the violence ceased. On deck, the parents were nearly incoherent with shock, restrained by the crew to prevent them from leaping into the water. The skipper issued a mayday call, voice steady only from long habit. A nearby vessel responded, arriving within minutes. Searchers later found only a shredded life vest and a small shoe washed onto the rocks near Seal Island. Divers sent into the bay reported no remains, noting that great whites often do not fully consume large prey, but that currents and scavengers quickly erase what little is left. The family's fishing gear, half-packed and stained, was left abandoned in the corner of the charter office, later returned to them in silence. The funeral was held quietly in Mossel Bay. Closed caskets were necessary, and only close relatives attended. Local authorities confirmed the attack to the press, but emphasized its rarity, noting that thousands visit the bay safely each year. The incident was not widely covered outside South Africa, remaining a local tragedy rather than a global headline. As the two young brothers discovered that Mossel Bay offered no protection from the ocean's apex predator, thousands of miles away in Australia, a worker would learn that bull sharks hunt just as efficiently in fresh water as they do in the open sea. It was April 18, 2015, in Brisbane, Queensland. The Brisbane River was calm in the evening heat, its surface shifting with the tide as city lights shimmered faintly across the water. For most, it was just another humid night along the river, but for one group of young men, the hours that followed would be remembered as the night everything went wrong. Josh Carter was 24, a warehouse worker who had lived in the outer suburbs his whole life. Fishing was his escape from long shifts and the steady noise of forklifts and pallets. He often spoke of saving for a small aluminum boat, hoping one day to fish offshore instead of along muddy banks. Known for his stubborn streak, Josh prided himself on not spooking easily and tended to brush off warnings he thought were exaggerated. That night, he had gone out with 3 friends, 2 co-workers, and a cousin. They carried folding chairs, a cooler, and rods, settling near a piling where the water ran deep. It was a familiar spot where they had pulled in catfish before. Josh was the most confident of the group, the one who insisted they could handle night fishing in the river. To him, the risks were more stories than reality. The Brisbane River that night carried the aftermath of recent rain. The current pushed debris downstream, and the water was opaque, a brown surface that revealed nothing below. Bull sharks are known to inhabit rivers like the Brisbane year-round, able to tolerate fresh water better than most shark species. They grow to over 10 feet long, powerful and aggressive, especially in murky conditions where visibility is low. After heavy rainfall, they often push further upstream in search of food. Locals knew this and often warned newcomers not to wade in after dark, when sharks hunted closer to shore. Those warnings had reached Josh before. Co-workers had joked about the river being full of bullies after rain, but he dismissed it as exaggeration. That night, One friend muttered unease when the lines snagged repeatedly near the piling, suggesting they leave it. Another noted sudden splashes in the distance that didn't sound like fish. Josh, irritated by the tangle in his line, stripped to his shorts and stepped into the water waist deep, brushing off their protests. He wanted his lure back, and he didn't like wasting tackle. The water was cool against the heat of the night, and for a moment everything seemed routine. His friends called from the bank, watching him move carefully toward the piling. Then, without warning, a violent thrash erupted beside him. In the dim light, a massive shape broke the surface, and Josh shouted sharply before the water churned red. The bull shark had clamped onto his leg, jaws crushing through muscle and bone. He screamed once, a sound that carried across the river, before the animal pulled hard, yanking him off balance. The current swallowed both in a surge of foam and mud. His friends shouted, frozen for seconds that felt longer, before one stumbled forward as if to go in after him, but stopped, knowing it was useless. Josh resurfaced briefly, his arms flailing as the shark thrashed below, dragging him in jagged arcs. His cousin later recalled the sound of splashing being louder than the shouting. Then the river closed again, leaving only ripples spreading out toward the bank. For nearly a minute, the group stood stunned, voices breaking into panic. One vomited on the grass, while another screamed for help toward the road. Authorities arrived within the hour, launching small boats with floodlights. They dragged the section of river through the night, pulling up branches, debris, and bits of clothing. By dawn, the only trace found was one of Josh's boots, torn open along the side, and scraps of his shirt. The river gave back no body. The funeral was held a week later in a modest chapel near his family's home. The service was quiet, with co-workers, relatives, and a few old school friends sitting in silence as his parents buried an empty coffin. Media reports mentioned the incident briefly, noting it as another reminder of bull sharks in the Brisbane River, but the coverage faded after a single day. Yet even as Josh's fatality became a red flag in the murky waters of Brisbane River, halfway across the Pacific, a lifelong island resident would discover that familiarity with the ocean meant nothing to a circling tiger shark. It was September 12th, 2016, off Kihei, Maui. The shoreline looked calm under the late morning sun, the Pacific stretching outward in shifting shades of blue. A few tourists floated near the beach, unaware of the advisory flags at the lifeguard tower. For those who noticed, the warnings seemed routine, unremarkable. The ocean appeared inviting, yet beneath the surface, the conditions carried risks that most visitors could not see. Aaron Kimura, 38, had grown up on Maui. He worked as a mechanic in Kahului, known among friends for his skill at coaxing life back into aging cars. When not in the shop, the ocean was where he felt most comfortable. He snorkeled regularly, often dismissing posted warnings as exaggerated or meant for people unfamiliar with the sea. To him, knowing the water was a matter of pride, something that set locals apart from visitors. That morning, he had arranged to meet two friends at Kamaole Beach Park for a short swim before the work week resumed. Aaron's goal that day was simple: to show his friends a reef he often visited after storms, believing that the shifting sand exposed new coral and sea life. He carried only basic gear, mask, snorkel, fins, and drifted farther out than usual, drawn by the curiosity that often kept him in the water long after others had gone ashore. His friends stayed closer to the surface, glancing occasionally in his direction, but trusting his confidence. Rainstorms the day before had churned up silt, clouding the normally clear water with a hazy suspension that reduced visibility. Small bait fish flickered near the surface in jittery clusters, a sign that larger predators might be nearby. Lifeguards had posted red flags and shark advisories that morning, standard procedure after murky weather, though many visitors passed without looking. For Aaron, such flags were part of the scenery, reminders he rarely heeded according to his friends. However, he underestimated the predators that lurk in this area. Tiger sharks are among the largest predatory sharks in Hawaiian waters, averaging 10 to 14 feet in length and weighing hundreds of pounds. Unlike reef sharks, which tend to keep their distance from humans, tiger sharks are known to patrol shorelines, especially after storms bring runoff that attracts fish and turtles. Their reputation comes from their opportunistic feeding behavior. They investigate objects in the water and sometimes strike without hesitation. Though uncommon, fatal encounters in Hawaii have historically involved tiger sharks close to shore in silty conditions. Half an hour into the swim, Aaron drifted farther out, finning toward the reef line where the haze deepened. His friends noticed but assumed he wanted space to explore. From shore, a few beachgoers later recalled seeing the small group spread out in the water but paid little attention. Beneath the surface, Aaron paused to adjust his mask, unaware that movement around him had shifted. The bait fish scattered abruptly, streaking away into the gloom. One friend raised his head to look toward Aaron and spotted a dorsal fin breaking the surface. At first he thought it might be a turtle, until the shape angled sharply and sliced through the water with purpose. Aaron surfaced seconds later, scanning around him while the fin disappeared back into the murk. His friends started paddling toward him, but as they drew closer, the shark reappeared, circling wide. The first strike came from below. Witnesses described a sudden eruption of water as the shark drove upward, seizing Aaron at his side. His arms flailed as he screamed for help, the sound carrying faintly across the surface. His snorkel and mask came loose, bobbing away. For a moment, the shark released him, circling again as blood spread in a widening plume. His friend stopped short, paralyzed by fear, hovering yards away. The shark struck a second time, this time clamping across his upper body. The force dragged him beneath the surface in a violent pull, his fins thrashing briefly before vanishing into the foam. One friend shouted for help, but neither dared get closer. The scene lasted less than a minute, yet each moment stretched with unbearable weight. Lifeguards responded within minutes after shouts reached shore. Jet skis were launched, and rescuers scoured the area, but there was no sign of Aaron. The only evidence recovered at first were fragments of his snorkel gear and one fin, torn at the strap, which washed back to the sand. His friends gave shaken statements, their recollections aligning with the beachgoers who had seen the dorsal fin from shore. The following afternoon, search teams located partial remains about half a mile south of Kamaole Beach, caught in the rocky shallows, a torn wetsuit top, and portions of Aaron's lower leg, identified by a tattoo his family later confirmed. The recovery ended, hopes that he might somehow have survived, and officials concluded the attack had been fatal within minutes. Beaches along Kihei were closed for 2 days as authorities monitored the waters. Signs warned swimmers to stay clear, though by the third day, most restrictions were lifted. No remains were ever recovered. His funeral, held a week later in Wailuku, was private at his parents' request, attended only by family and close friends. Local officials noted the incident in their records, citing storm runoff and murky conditions as contributing factors. Aaron's overconfidence in familiar waters proved no match for a tiger shark's calculated hunt off Maui. Meanwhile, in the Red Sea, an engineer on his first open water adventure would discover that oceanic whitetips show no mercy to inexperienced swimmers. It was October 14, 2013, off the coast of Marsa Alam, Egypt. The Red Sea stretched calm under a hazy sun, the surface broken only by small ripples pushed in from the open water. For tourists aboard a modest dive boat, the day promised clear visibility, warm water, and close encounters with coral life. Yet beyond the reefs and the steadying presence of the guide's boat, the open expanse carried risks that were less visible but no less present. Lucas Weber was 29, a mechanical engineer from Hamburg, Germany. He was on a short holiday with 2 colleagues, taking advantage of time away from the factory where he had worked since finishing his apprenticeship. Lucas was not a seasoned traveler, but he valued experiences that felt out of the ordinary, and the snorkeling trip had seemed harmless compared to diving. He was fit, calm-natured, and not inclined toward risk, but the chance to swim among bright fish in the open Red Sea felt like an opportunity he might not get again. Though Lucas had grown up swimming in lakes, he had never been in the open sea without a shoreline nearby. He relied on the tour operators, whose brochures emphasized safety and years of experience. His friends noted he was slightly hesitant at first, tugging at the straps of the rented fins and mask as the boat rocked, but he eventually joined the others in the water. His goal was simple: to enjoy the reef, follow the group, and make it back with stories to tell. Nothing more. Beneath the surface, the water was strikingly clear, revealing coral shelves dotted with parrotfish and angelfish. Shafts of sunlight reached down in columns, the sand far below glowing pale white. Yet the reef gave way quickly to deeper blue, where the water seemed to stretch into nothing. The group floated about 200 yards from the boat, scattered but within sight of one another. Unbeknownst to them, an apex predator is already eyeing them. The oceanic white-tip shark is a species adapted to precisely these waters. They can weigh over 300 pounds, and their jaws are capable of exerting bite forces exceeding 500 psi, enough to shear through flesh and bone with terrifying efficiency. Stocky, with long pectoral fins and rounded white-tipped ends, it is known for lingering in open ocean zones where smaller prey might drift. Though often solitary and slow-moving, it has a reputation among divers for assertive approaches, circling and bumping before striking if food seems within reach. Unlike reef sharks that typically avoid people, the white tip is bold, driven by opportunism in waters where resources can be scarce. The guides had warned about keeping close to the group, but one later admitted seeing a distant dorsal fin and assuming it was a harmless reef shark. The tourists drifted farther than expected, carried by a mild current. Lucas, not as strong a swimmer as some, hung near the back. A few noticed the large shape sliding in wide circles beneath them, but in the moment, it seemed more curiosity than threat. The crew did not signal for the group to return immediately. As the shark closed in, its behavior changed from circling at a distance to brushing against fins and legs. One swimmer felt a push against his calf. Another saw the broad head pass within a few feet. Unease spread through the group, but they hesitated, still following the guide's calm gestures. Lucas, lagging, had little awareness of how exposed he looked compared to the tighter cluster ahead. The boat remained 200 yards away, not an impossible distance but far for a sudden sprint in open water. Witnesses later described the moment the shark struck. It rose fast from below and clamped onto Lucas's shoulder, twisting with enough force to tear deep into muscle. His snorkel was knocked free as he tried to cry out, and his flailing brought a brief burst of bubbles to the surface. For a moment, he surfaced red-faced, eyes wide, before the shark came again, jolting into his torso and dragging him under. The sound above water was a mix of muffled thrashing and panicked shouts as the slick of blood spread quickly. The group scattered. Several kicked desperately toward the boat. Others shouted at the crew to throw lines. Lucas resurfaced once, turning frantically with one arm before being pulled under in a sudden jerk. The water frothed and then stilled except for the widening stain. In less than a minute, the shark had reduced his movements to nothing, circling once more before disappearing into the blue. The guides shouted for everyone to climb aboard as hands reached frantically for swimmers at the lap. Lucas surfaced limp, his face pale and mouth slack. Tourists shouted for help, and the dive guides reacted quickly, pulling him toward the boat with a lifebuoy and hauling him aboard. He was unconscious, his wetsuit torn and soaked red, the wounds severe across his upper torso and arm. They called for help while on the way to shore, and attempts were made to stop the bleeding with towels and first aid kits, but the injuries were extensive. By the time paramedics met them at the shore, they confirmed that he had died. An autopsy later confirmed that he had succumbed to massive blood loss and trauma within hours of the attack. Egyptian authorities eventually recorded the incident as a fatal shark attack and cited unsafe practices by the tour operator, particularly the distance from the boat and the failure to recall the group at the first sign of a large shark. Lucas's family in Hamburg received the news days later and held a quiet memorial with little coverage beyond local papers. The accident was noted briefly in Red Sea diving forums, but quickly faded from international awareness. Lucas's inexperience in open waters sealed his fate against a predator. But in Cape Cod, a seasoned charter captain would learn that decades of experience meant nothing when a mako shark struck with lightning speed. It was August 12th, 2017, off Cape Cod, Massachusetts. The sea looked calm in the morning light, the surface rolling in low swells that broke white against the distant sandbars. A charter boat drifted quietly beyond the sight of crowded beaches, its hull rocking with the weight of the tide. Out there, far from the noise of the shore, a routine fishing trip was about to turn into something irreversible. David Ross was 45, a veteran charter fisherman who had spent over 2 decades running trips for summer tourists. He had built a reputation among locals for his steady hands and ability to manage difficult catches, especially the high-energy species sought by clients eager for sport. His work was seasonal but steady, and he supplemented it with winter boat repairs in the off months. Though he rarely spoke much about risk, his experience gave others the impression he had everything under control at sea. Fishing was not just a job for David, but a point of pride. He often emphasized giving his clients the full experience, letting them see the fight of a big fish up close. While some captains preferred cutting the line when things grew difficult, David prided himself on handling the release directly, ensuring the animal swam off rather than wasting away on a trailing hook. It was a habit that set him apart, one that kept business consistent, but also meant he placed himself closer to danger than many of his peers. The morning of the trip was warm, with a clear sky and light wind. The boat moved steadily over the blue-green water, the air carrying a faint, briny tang as gulls traced arcs overhead. The 3 clients who had booked the charter watched the rods fixed along the stern rail, their eyes shifting between the horizon and the lines that trembled occasionally with passing current. A sense of calm hung over the group, though the silence carried an edge of anticipation. Cape Cod waters are known for their sharks, especially makos in summer. Mako sharks are among the fastest in the ocean, capable of short bursts over 40 miles per hour. They are prized in sport fishing for their acrobatics, often leaping from the water when hooked. Though not common attackers of humans, their size, sometimes exceeding 10 feet and several hundred pounds, combined with sharp teeth and explosive energy, makes any close encounter dangerous. By late morning, one of the lines snapped taut, the rod bending as a mako struck. The fight lasted nearly half an hour, the fish thrashing, leaping clear of the water and surging in long, fast runs. The clients looked uneasy as the shark was eventually brought alongside, still surging but clearly tiring. One man shifted on his feet, muttering that it seemed unsafe to have the animal so close to the boat. The others nodded but said little. David focused on the line, preparing to unhook it. The fish continued to thrash, slamming its body against the hull with sharp thuds. David leaned low, gripping the leader line, waiting for the right moment to slip the hook. The clients later recalled seeing the shark's tail whip violently against the water, the power of each movement unsettling in its closeness. David adjusted his stance, speaking in a low tone to keep the men calm, before reaching out again toward the mouth of the fish. What happened next unfolded in seconds, but left a lasting imprint on everyone aboard. Without warning, the shark surged upward with a burst of speed, launching its head over the gunwale. It struck David's lower body with tremendous force, clamping its jaws around his thigh. The sound of impact was sharp, followed instantly by the heavy splash of water spilling across the deck. David gave a hoarse cry as the shark's teeth tore deep into muscle, then let go almost immediately, sliding back into the sea. The injury was catastrophic. Blood gushed across the deck in sheets, spraying as David collapsed against the rail. One client grabbed his shoulders to keep him from falling overboard, while another scrambled for towels, pressing them against the wound with shaking hands. Despite their efforts, the blood did not slow. The shark circled briefly near the surface, its dorsal fin cutting the water, before fading back into the depths. David drifted in and out of consciousness as the men tried to hold pressure, their clothes soaked red. The boat's deck became slick beneath them. One client fumbled for the radio, calling for help, his voice breaking as he tried to stay calm. The minutes stretched, each second marked by the steady weakening of the man they were trying to save. By the time another vessel arrived in response, his breathing had stopped. The Coast Guard later brought the body ashore. Paramedics confirmed what was already clear. Blood loss had been too rapid for survival. The boat's deck was described as stained almost solidly red, with scattered equipment marking the frantic attempts to save him. David's funeral was held quietly in a small Cape Cod church. Fellow fishermen attended, many of them uneasy with how suddenly routine had shifted to disaster. His family requested privacy, and local coverage was limited, overshadowed by other summer events. Thanks for watching. If these stories of sudden tragedies entertained you, click here for more.